Today's gospel reading is found in Mark, the first chapter. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons. And the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
The year was 1903. The charismatic, well-respected speaker at a banquet for a world-renowned physician was the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Dallas, George W. Truett. In an inspired moment, he addressed those who were gathered. "Is it not now the time to begin the erection of a great humanitarian hospital, one to which men of all creeds or those of none may come with equal confidence?" What would later become Baylor Hospital started out with a vision from a Baptist pastor who saw that the residents of a burgeoning city, Dallas, nonetheless had poor access to good health care, especially the poor themselves. Truett also would make no distinction among people in their access to health care on the basis of their religious convictions or the lack of them. So why did Dr. Truett see the tending of the sick and dying as something that the church ought to concern itself with? Or where, for that matter, did those Christian leaders who started Methodist, Presbyterian, or St. Paul's hospitals, notwithstanding what they are called today, where did they gain this insight? We need look no further than to our gospel text today from Mark chapter 1. Jesus has just left the synagogue in Capernaum, where he cast out an unclean spirit from a demon-possessed man. He didn't reward the disturbed man with a seat on a key synagogue committee. He didn't sit him down for talk therapy. This unclean spirit fed on fear and was so deeply rooted in the man that Jesus had to give him a deep cleaning. Jesus then goes next door to Simon Peter's house. If you go to Capernaum today, you will be able to see the ruins of the ancient synagogue and that house side by side. A church now is built atop the house where this very episode took place in the story. And by episode, I mean the healing of Peter's mother-in-law and of all those who then came knocking at the door who were sick and demon-possessed in search of healing. Jesus healed them all deeply. Healing, along with teaching, was integral to Jesus' ministry. And the implication is clear that if it was integral to Jesus' ministry, it should be integral to the church's ministry too. But what should the church's healing ministry entail? If we follow the pattern of this story of Jesus' healing ministry, we'll get some clues. When Jesus enters the house of Simon Peter, he learns that Peter's mother-in-law is sick. How did he learn it? Someone told him. In other words, they didn't think it noble to keep her fever a secret. The community cared enough to communicate about her illness. They took it to Jesus, just as we still can. What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. So Jesus goes to her at once, takes her by the hand, and raises her up. And her fever lifts as he lifts her up. Keep in mind, modern medicine has yet to be invented. And so we don't have a diagnosis of what caused this fever. What we have is Jesus caring about her being sick and doing something about it. He doesn't always, by the way, touch people to heal them, so touch is not the only healing technique. It's more, I think, about him being personally present to her. It matters to him that this woman is suffering physically. I can't begin to describe to you how much of our church's pastoral ministry involves caring for the sick in one way or another. I spent most of the day that I was writing this sermon being interrupted by phone calls or texts or emails from people who are suffering from COVID or other afflictions or about them. When people get sick, you see, they not only go to the doctor or the hospital themselves, they go to their church, and their church rallies in prayer and care for them and their loved ones. We actually keep something we call the care notes. That is a list of all those who are dealing with illness of various kinds and griefs, and we send that out every day to our staff and to those who ask for it. This is about all those who need to be lifted up in prayer. You see, we don't leave them to suffer in solitude, which leads to the second thing. The church has a healing ministry that goes beyond curing. When someone takes ill, they need medical help to address the disease. That is good and right. But there's always more going on when someone is sick than just the symptoms of the disease. The illness needs to be healed too. And the illness often includes feelings of being cut off, isolated, sometimes quarantined, don't you know? We do that by connecting with words and deeds, promises of prayer, notes of sympathy, calls of encouragement, casseroles on the front porch. There's something about the connection of the faith community that takes healing deeper than the curing of the disease. I told you about the church's commitment to health care by the building of hospitals. But the church also spawned something called chaplaincy work in hospitals that takes the issue of healing the person beyond the curing of the patient. While we have valiant medical personnel who have been working for nearly a year at levels of exhaustion unknown before COVID, there are also, on the job, trained clinical pastoral caregivers who visit these patients and their families courageously and compassionately. This is a holistic approach to healing that the church is involved in. Doctors and nurses address what is acute to the body of the patient. They often themselves go beyond that. But the special purview of pastoral caregivers and counselors is addressing the effects of the illness of the person. They don't just ask how a patient feels. They ask how the person feels about how they feel. They inquire about their faith, their prayers, their relationships. They talk to the families too, because, when one person is sick, the whole family experiences the illness. In our church, as in some others, we have Stephen ministers who walk beside people who are going through difficult times in their lives. We host the Grief and Loss Center of North Texas, led by Lori Taylor, to aid the emotional and spiritual healing of those who have experienced traumas like death or divorce or some other deep grief. Now watch what happens when Jesus lifts up Peter's unnamed mother-in-law. She immediately begins to serve them. Now, if this were my wife's mother-in-law, I can assure you that would include a meal. Now, you might look at that, though, and say, okay, so upon her being healed, all it looks like to me is that she returned to a subservient role that women played in that time, taking care of men in a patriarchal culture. Maybe, but there's something more to this. Notice that she was then, upon being healed, able to return to the web of life that she was part of. Her healing was more than curing because it restored her. So consider our COVID life right now. When someone is struck with a virus and is hospitalized, say, for weeks even, she loses her opportunity to work and take care of her family. Plus, her caregiving family members have their lives and work disrupted too, as do those at their places of work that are sometimes even shut down because of it. The ripple effect, in other words, of all of this is enormous. Sickness, you see, is systemic. We know this right now throughout our nation as many businesses have shuttered and others have been deeply impacted. Careers has been put on hold. Dreams have been deferred. We are working hard not only to address the coronavirus itself, but also to keep life afloat for people. We are seeing how a disease that afflicts an individual also afflicts a whole society. This is why access to preventive health care is so critical, along with good health education. You see, the church's healing ministry shouldn't just attend to the health of a person who gets sick after the fact. We have to advocate for health education, access to healthy foods, and health insurance for everyone too. Because see, look, when we politicize everything becomes about power rather than love. The love of power hurts. The power of love heals. We've seen this in the rollout of the vaccine that has been, well, let's just say disappointing from the very beginning. Not enough vaccine immediately available. The distribution fraught with supply chain issues. As always, the rich have fared better than the poor, and the healthy better than those who are beset by pre-existing conditions, whites better than people of color. It's just been one thing after another. This isn't about assigning blame so much as seeing the big picture. See, some things never change, it seems. We just had a remarkable presentation at Wilshire this week of Anthony Clairvaux's play, The Living. It was written in 1991 about the bubonic plague in 1665 in London. You would think it was written in 2021. All the same issues are present. The politics of privilege, the suspicions of people in power, the denial of the disease, the disparity between essential workers and the nobility, the violence spawned by fear, the outbreak of lying. At one point in the play, a minister reports to the mayor that despite warnings, the churches continue to meet to worship. Overhearing this, a nobleman replies, "Commendable, really? Stupid, but commendable." They wonder if there's any way to keep people from the church. Make the sermons more boring, one suggests. Impossible, says another. Well, here we are at Wilshire doing what we can, as are most other churches, trying to protect the health of the community by keeping our distance from one another right now without having to resort to more boring sermons. We want to promote deep healing, holistic wellness that touches on the physical, social, emotional, and spiritual vitality altogether. The end of the play holds out hope. Two survivors hold out their hands to each other and touch. It's the first time in the whole play, just there at the end, that there is any human touch. It's uplifting, just like Jesus reaching out his hand to touch Peter's mother-in-law and lift her up. We are praying these days that our no-touch healing ministry will help lift the fever of COVID-19 and at the same time some of our social illnesses as well. Then finally, we will all be able to clasp hands again and return to the land of the living. Amen.